The rooftop of Hotel Sheila was full of Seoul's most beautiful, most powerful, and most pretentious people on that Friday night. Champagne in crystal glasses, designer outfits worth more than most people's salaries, fake laughter bouncing off the night sky like it had somewhere better to be. Jae-won stood near the glass railing, looking out over the glittering city like he owned it, which technically he partially did. He was mid-conversation with a business associate when he felt it, that specific energy shift that happens when someone is walking toward you with absolute murder in their eyes. He turned slowly. Song Na-eun, actress, brand ambassador, and the woman he'd been casually seeing for the past 3 weeks, was crossing the rooftop in a floor-length red dress, champagne glass in one hand, and pure heartbreak in the other. Her hair was perfect, her makeup was perfect, and she was crying, which was ruining both. Jae-won, her voice cut through the ambient music like a blade through silk. Several heads turned. "Naeun," he said quietly, calmly, "now isn't the best time. You were with someone last night. It wasn't a question. Hyun-soo saw you, at Mingle's, with that girl from the pharmaceutical company." The business associate Jae-won had been speaking to suddenly discovered something very interesting to look at on the opposite side of the rooftop. Smart man. "I think we should find somewhere private to—" "Don't you dare try to manage me right now." Naeun's voice cracked. And here was the thing about Naeun. She was a brilliant actress on screen, but this wasn't acting. This was a woman who had genuinely, against all her better judgment, fallen in love with a man who had told her from the very beginning he wasn't available for falling in love with. "You looked at me like—" She stopped, pressing her fingers to her lips. "You looked at me like I was special." "You are special, Naeun. Don't." The word came out broken. "Don't say that with that face and that voice and mean absolutely nothing by it. Do you know how many times you've told women they're special? Do you even remember our conversations? Or do you just recycle the same lines? Same face, same voice, different woman every month. Is that all this was?" The rooftop had gone very, very quiet. Somewhere a waiter stopped pouring champagne mid-glass. Jae-won set down his drink. He put his hands gently on Naeun's shoulders. He looked at her with those eyes, dark, sincere-looking, impossible to fully read, and he said, "I'm sorry, genuinely. You deserved better from me." And somehow that was worse, because it was said so calmly, so reasonably, without guilt, without shame, without any sign that this moment was costing him anything at all. Naeun stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then she threw her champagne directly in his face, dropped the glass onto the rooftop floor, which did not break, which felt like a missed dramatic opportunity, turned on her heel and walked away with her head held at a perfect 90 degrees, not running, walking, slowly, like a woman who'd decided her dignity was the one thing he couldn't take from her. Jae-won stood there, champagne dripping from his jaw, tie completely soaked, surrounded by Seoul's elite watching him in varying degrees of shock, judgment, and grim satisfaction. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a white pocket square, and calmly dabbed his face. Then he turned back to look at the view, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't happened. That was Jae-won, 33 years old, CEO of Han Group, the most charming and most emotionally unavailable man in Seoul. Everyone in that room knew his story, the trail of broken hearts, the women who fell for him despite themselves, the way he made you feel like the center of the universe and then disappeared so smoothly you almost questioned whether he'd been real. But nobody, not his best friend, not his mother, not the women who loved him and hated him and loved him again, nobody knew that his story was about to change completely. Because of a woman who didn't even know who he was. a woman who 3 weeks from this exact moment would fall asleep during his keynote speech at a charity gala, and somehow, in doing so, completely destroy the most carefully constructed emotional fortress in the whole of Seoul. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about who Han Jae-won actually was. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you're going to question everything you think you know about players, love, and how the most guarded people fall the absolute hardest. Don't go anywhere. Han Jae-won, 33 years old, was what happened when the universe decided to be deeply unfair in every possible direction simultaneously. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of face that made people stop mid-sentence and completely lose their train of thought. Dark eyes that could look warm and cold at the exact same time, which should have been a warning sign to everyone, but instead made people want desperately to figure out what was behind them. When he smiled, really smiled, not the polished press event smile, it was catastrophic. Women had described it in journal entries, in texts to their closest friends at midnight, in hushed tones to expensive therapists. He was also the CEO of Han Group, a sprawling conglomerate that controlled luxury hotels, entertainment companies, high-end restaurants, and a fashion house that dressed half of Korea's celebrities. Inherited from his father at 26, expanded aggressively in his own right ever since, net worth somewhere in the billions, though he never talked about money because people who actually have it rarely need to. He was also brilliant, not the smart for someone born rich kind of brilliant, actually devastatingly intelligent in a way that was almost unfair given everything else he already had. He could walk into a meeting with zero preparation and cut straight to the problem that a team of MBAs had been failing to solve for 6 months. The point is, Han Jae-won had every single advantage a human man could have, and used exactly none of them to build anything real or lasting in his personal life. His best friend and oldest companion, Choi Min-ho, had a theory about this. They'd been friends since age 7. Had grown up in the same neighborhood, attended the same schools, watched each other become adults. Min-ho was now married to Jae-won, a psychotherapist, and was blissfully happy in a way that Jae-won observed from a respectful and slightly envious distance. "You're scared," Min-ho said, one night over late-night ramyeon at a 24-hour pojang matcha in Mapo, where Jae-won liked to eat because nobody recognized him under the greasy lighting and nobody expected him to be charming. "I'm not scared of anything." "You're scared of ending up like your parents." Jae-won stabbed a fish cake with his chopstick. "Eat your food." "Your dad cheated for years. Your mom eventually left. Neither of them were ever actually present even when they were physically in the same room. You watched all of it from ages 8 to 22, and now you do exactly what your dad did. You collect women, you make them feel like the most important person in the universe, and then, before anything real can develop, you vanish so smoothly you almost questioned whether he'd been real. You've recreated the exact dynamic you hate most. When did you get a psychology degree?" "Jae-won makes me listen to podcasts about relationships." "Those aren't degrees, Min-ho. They're basically degrees. They are really genuinely not." The thing was, Min-ho wasn't entirely wrong. Not that Jae-won would ever admit that. He had a carefully curated internal explanation for his lifestyle that he'd repeated to himself so many times it felt like truth. He was busy. He was focused on building the company. He was always honest with women about his intentions, so technically nobody got hurt. Technically everything was fine. Technically he was actually the most honest man in Seoul because at least he told them he wasn't serious, which was more than most men did. "You're lying to yourself," Min-ho said. "I'm not." "You are. You tell them you're not looking for anything serious, and they say they understand. But you also spend 3 weeks making them feel like they're the most important person who has ever existed, and then you pull back so gradually they almost don't notice until it's done. That's not honesty. That's strategy. Jae-won didn't have a good answer for that, so he ordered more ramen. He was genuinely extraordinarily good at the beginning of things, the part where you learn someone's interests and remember them weeks later without being reminded, the part where you notice small details. She's cold in this restaurant, give her your jacket before she has to ask. She mentioned loving a specific author 2 conversations ago, have the book delivered with no note. She looks tired, cancel the reservation and cook instead. He was present and attentive in a way that most people never experience from anyone in their entire lives. And then, like someone flipping a light switch, he was gone. He'd dated actresses and architects and artists, a marine biologist once for exactly 19 days, which was fascinating and ended badly, a Seoul National University literature professor who, during their breakup, cried while quoting his own texts back to him, which was by far the most devastating thing that had ever happened to him, and he thought about it more than he liked to admit. His phone currently had 4 women in what Minho called rotation, none of whom knew about the others. Naeun, the actress, whose situation had just resolved itself with champagne on a rooftop. Soojin, the architect, who was genuinely interesting and had approximately 3 weeks left in his attention span and didn't know it. Grace, a Korean-American pediatric surgeon, who was frankly too smart for him, which was actually terrifying rather than attractive the way intelligence usually was. And Yuki again, because she kept reappearing in his life like a recurring plot point in a drama that refused to reach its conclusion. His assistant, Miss Park, a formidably organized woman who had been with him since he took over the company, managed his calendar with military precision and had long since stopped commenting on the personal appointments. She'd made peace with it the way you make peace with weather. "You know what your actual problem is?" Minho said on another ramen night, maybe 2 months before everything changed. "My problem is that you never stop telling me my problem. You want connection without vulnerability. You want someone to know you without showing them who you are. You want to be loved without risking being left. That's not unique to me, that's everyone." No, most people eventually take the risk. They get scared and they take it anyway because the alternative is worse. You never do. You built a system where you never have to. It's a good system. It's a lonely system dressed up to look like freedom. Jae-won looked out the Pojangmacha window at the Seoul street, at the people walking past, at a young couple sharing food from one container without even thinking about it, that unconscious ease of 2 people who have decided to take up space together. "Good for you," he said, but there was something in his voice when he said it, something very small and very quiet that sounded almost exactly like grief. Minho looked at his best friend for 26 years and saw something on his face that he hadn't seen in a very long time, something that looked like the beginning of something real. He felt simultaneously happy about it and deeply concerned, which was the correct response. "Okay," he said, "I'll get her contact." Ladies, would you have said what Amara said to his face on the first meeting? And honestly, would that kind of directness attract you or intimidate you? Tell me in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that button and never miss a story. Jae-won had Amara's professional contact information by the next morning, via the partnership coordinator. He used it for 2 completely professional days, sending 2 completely professional emails about the partnership structure discussion that were in fact actually professional and not pretexts for anything else. On the 3rd day, he sent this. "Jae-won, the working group presentation tomorrow. The seats at the front have better acoustics, in case you're trying to stay awake." Amara stared at her phone for a full 10 seconds, then typed, "Amara, Mr. Han, this is a professional contact number." Jae-won, "I'm aware." Amara, "Are you using it professionally right now?" Jae-won, "I'm professionally concerned about the acoustic challenges facing audience members at the back of the room." Amara, "Good night, Mr. Han." She put her phone face down on the hotel desk, then picked it up again 20 seconds later because she was, despite everything, and very annoyingly, smiling. Sun-young, watching this from the other bed in their shared hotel room, screamed quietly and at length into her pillow. "You texted him! Do you understand what that means? It means he has my number and used it to make a joke. From Jae-won, texting first means Sun-young. He never texts first. That's practically his whole thing. Everyone knows." "Tell me the whole thing then, since everyone keeps implying there's a whole thing." Sun-young sat up straight, put down her phone, and delivered a comprehensive briefing on Jae-won with the thoroughness of someone who had been waiting for this exact opportunity. The company, the family background, the reputation, the women, the rooftop incident from 3 weeks ago that was still trending on entertainment news under the headline "Ice King Stays Cold," full analysis, the collective Seoul understanding that he was someone who left a trail of broken hearts so consistent and well documented, it was basically a personality trait at this point. Amara listened to all of this, processed it, nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Okay? That's it? What would you like me to say? He sat with you for 40 minutes at the gala. He never does that. People literally track this. He circulates at events, makes a circuit, charms everyone, and commits to no single conversation. He sat with you for 40 uninterrupted minutes, and people noticed, and it was discussed in the group chat before we even got back to the hotel." There's a group chat? There are multiple group chats. About him sitting with me? About Jae-won behaving differently at a gala, yes. This is a notable event. Amara looked at Sun-young with genuine affection and zero change in her actual position. He's clearly someone who collects women the way some people collect expensive watches, something to admire briefly, show off occasionally, and put back in the case when the novelty wears off. I'm in Seoul for 3 weeks. I'm not here to be someone's interesting foreign novelty. But what if... I've heard "but what if he's different with you" before, Sun-young. It's the most expensive sentence in the history of women's emotional lives. She turned off her lamp. Sun-young sat in the dark processing this. But Amara lay in the dark staring at the ceiling for a few minutes because she was 29 and human, and a devastatingly attractive man had specifically crossed a crowded ballroom to sit with her, and then made her laugh twice, and then texted her the next day, and she was not, it turned out, made entirely of stone, just very good at appearing to be when it was useful. The next morning, at the working group session, Amara arrived to find 2 things. Her data presentation was already loaded and projected perfectly on the main screen, which she had not done, and which required access she hadn't given anyone. And on the table at her seat was a very specific coffee in the particular style she'd mentioned once briefly in a 40-minute gala conversation, as an aside in a sentence that was primarily about something else entirely. There was no note, no card, just the coffee. She looked up. Jae-won was in the front row looking at the projected presentation with tremendous focus, the expression of a man reviewing extremely interesting data, which was clearly a performance, but a charming one. Amara sat down next to him. "The acoustics are better at the front," she said. He looked at her with that almost smile. "Good morning, Dr. Asante. You arranged my presentation. I helped coordinate the AV setup for the session, professional service. And the coffee? I don't know what you're referring to. The Ghanaian spiced coffee that I mentioned once briefly as an aside in a sentence that was primarily about something else entirely. Someone must have... Where did you even find Ghanaian spiced coffee in Seoul, Jae-won?" The use of his first name without the title landed between them like something small and significant. He looked at her with that expression again, the one she was beginning to recognize as his actual face, rather than the performance face. "I know Seoul very well," he said. "You went looking specifically. I pay attention to things. You pay attention strategically. This morning I paid attention because I wanted you to have a good coffee before a long meeting. That's the whole of it." Amara picked up the cup, looked at it, looked at him. "I told you I'm not easy to impress." "I know. I find it motivating. You should find it discouraging. That's not how I'm built. You might consider rebuilding." He laughed. A real, unguarded laugh, the kind that didn't have any performance in it at all, and Amara decided in that exact moment that this was significantly more dangerous than everything else, so she turned to face the screen and got out her notes. She kept the coffee.
If you're as invested in this story as I think you are, do me a favor right now and subscribe. The button is right there. We put out new stories every week, and every single one is designed to make you feel something. Now, back to watching Jae-won try very hard and fail in very interesting ways. Let's continue. Over the next 2 weeks, Han Jae-won did something that had no precedent in his entire adult romantic history. He actually tried. Not in the polished, calibrated way he usually did, not the strategic charm with its carefully measured outputs. This was messier and less certain, and occasionally embarrassing in ways he had no existing framework for, because embarrassment was not typically something he had to factor in. He took Amara to actual places. The VIP, everything, ultra-exclusive venues he usually used to impress people didn't work on her, and he figured that out within 48 hours. "Do you want to go to dinner?" he asked on the 3rd day. "I can get us into Jungsik." "Is that the Michelin-starred place?" 3 Michelin stars, yes. "I don't want somewhere where the food arrives in 45-minute intervals and there is an atmosphere requirement that prevents actual conversation." "What do you want?" "I saw a pojang matcha near Dongdaemun Market this morning when I was walking. The spicy rice cake stalls. I've been wanting to try the proper version since I got here." "Tteokbokki." "Yes, that. Is it good?" Han Jae-won, who had not eaten at a covered roadside stall in approximately 11 years, who had been to every 3 Michelin-star restaurant in Asia, who owned 2 upscale Korean restaurants himself, said without hesitation, "It's excellent. I know the best one." And that is how the CEO of Han Group ended up sitting on a plastic stool at 8 p.m. eating tteokbokki from a pojang matcha run by a grandmother who had been making the same recipe for 31 years, while the woman across from him stole his fish cakes repeatedly and rated the tteokbokki on criteria she explained with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had genuinely thought about this. "This is a 7, she declared. "The halmyeoni who makes this has been here for 30 years, which means she's been coasting on institutional reputation. The sauce needs more gochujang. The texture is right, but the heat ratio is off." You've been in Korea for 12 days. 12 days is sufficient to develop opinions if you're paying attention. The stall near the east entrance of Dongdaemun Market is an 8.5, significantly better sauce, comparable texture. "How many tteokbokki stalls have you visited?" 11. I have a system." "You have a tteokbokki ranking system?" "I have a system for everything. I'm a development economist. If you're not collecting data and analyzing it, you're just having experiences." Most people would say experiences are the point. Analyzed experiences are better experiences. You notice more. Jae-won watched her eat with the same full attention she brought to everything, watched her argue cheerfully with the halmyeoni about the gochujang ratio and win, the halmyeoni conceding with a respectful nod after some resistance. She waved off a group of passing men who tried to photograph them with a calm and absolute "no thank you" that required no further discussion. She didn't look at Jae-won to check his reaction. She just handled it and moved on. "You're the most unusual person I've met in a long time." People keep meaning that as something other than a compliment. I mean it as one. You're direct and precise, and you don't perform for anyone, and you build tteokbokki ranking systems on your evenings off from meaningful international work. Everyone should have a system for the things that matter to them. What matters to you? She thought about it, which I appreciated. She didn't give the reflexive answer. The work, genuinely the work. The communities we partner with, watching the microfinance collectives expand and seeing what women do with access to capital and autonomy. My family, good food, properly evaluated, books, honest conversation. She looked at him. What matters to you? Jae-won opened his mouth and realized the honest answer was the company, problems to solve, the next deal, and when he was with women, maintaining the right impression, making sure nothing got close enough to require him to be real. He didn't say that, but he didn't lie either. He said, "I'm still figuring that out." Amara looked at him for a moment and said, "That's the most honest thing you've said to me." Is that bad? No, it's actually a good sign. Most people your age who haven't figured it out don't know they haven't figured it out. She stole another fish cake. What made you take over the company? My father stepped back. There was no one else. That's not what made you. That's what happened. What made you? I was good at it. Being good at something isn't a reason to give your life to it. It's a reason to not give your life to something else. That's avoidance logic. It's worked. Has it? The Halmyoni watched them from her station with the alert interest of someone who has seen a very many late-night conversations over 30 years of pojang matcha, and had strong opinions about which ones were going somewhere. You're doing it again, Amara said. Doing what? You're deflecting with competence. When the conversation gets close to something real, you pivot to what you're good at professionally. It's a very clean escape route. You've known me for 2 weeks. I've watched you for 2 weeks. There's a difference. She looked at him directly. Why did you come over to my table at the gala? Real answer. I told you, you fell asleep during my speech. The real answer. He met her eyes. Because you were the only person in a room of 500 who wasn't performing. And I live in a world where everyone is always performing, including me, especially me. And you were just sitting there, reading a book, and then sleeping, and then laughing, and you didn't care what anyone thought about it. And I couldn't remember the last time I saw that. Amara was quiet for a moment. That's a real answer. Yes. Thank you for it. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, Seoul moved around them, indifferent and alive. I need to say something, Amara said carefully. I'm here for 1 more week, and I'm not the kind of person who does whatever this is on work trips. I have a job that matters to me more than most things, and I'm not looking for something complicated. Okay. So if this is where you usually say something like, let's not put labels on it, or we understand each other, I'm not going to say that. You say some version of that to everyone. I know. I mean it when I say it to them. I don't mean it now. Jae-won, I know you're leaving in a week. I know you live in Accra and I live in Seoul. I know your entire skill set is seeing through people, and I apparently have a documented history of being exactly the kind of person you have every reason to avoid. I know all of that. He held her eyes. I'm still not going to tell you it's nothing, because it's not nothing. I don't fully understand what it is yet, but it's not nothing. The Halmyoni at the station made a sound that could have been approval. Amara looked at him for a long moment with an expression he still couldn't entirely read. 1 more week, she said. I know. I mean it. I know you mean it. And I'm still rating every tteokbokki stall we go to. I wouldn't have it any other way. That last week was the most honest Jae-won had been with another person in years. Not the curated honesty of telling women early that he wasn't serious. That wasn't honesty, as Min Ho correctly identified. That was strategy with honest-sounding language. This was the other kind, the kind that costs something. He showed Amara the Seoul that wasn't in any guidebook, the used bookshop in Insadong he'd been going to since he was a student, where the owner kept certain books aside for him, and he'd never taken anyone because it felt like a private thing. The traditional tea house in Bukchon where he went when he needed to think clearly, sitting in the same corner with the same tea for an hour, no phone. The pojang matcha in Mapo-gu, where he and Min Ho had their most important conversations, where the lighting was bad and the ramen was good, and nobody expected anything from him. He told her about his father, Not the official version, the successful patriarch who had built the Han group and was spoken of with a reverence that Jae-won had always found both accurate and incomplete. The real version. The affairs, the coldness, the specific way his parents occupied the same house while being completely absent from each other, and the way Jae-won understood on an ordinary Tuesday at age 14, watching his mother pack a single bag with very controlled movements, that love could be the vehicle for extraordinary damage, that people who claimed to love each other could simultaneously be destroying each other, that intimacy was, at its core, a risk. "And you decided," Amara said, on a walk along the Han River in the early evening, the light doing something golden over the water, "that the risk wasn't worth it. I decided to manage the risk, always leave before it becomes real, stay close enough to have connection, far enough that no one can use it against you." That's one of the loneliest things I've heard described as a strategy. It was supposed to be efficient. How has it worked out? I'm 33 and I'm here telling a development economist about my emotional damage over the Han River, so... He paused. Badly. She laughed. He laughed. And in that moment, in the Han River light, something shifted that he felt in his chest before he could name it. Amara told him about her own life, growing up between Accra and London, fluent in two cultures and fully settled in neither. Getting her PhD and discovering the academic world had very specific ideas about who belonged in it. Choosing the NGO world not as a default, but as a deliberate decision that the work had to mean something tangible or she didn't want to do it. The relationships that hadn't worked because she was always somewhere else, always building toward the next phase of something, and that had been easy to accept until recently, when it had started to feel less like freedom and more like a habit she'd never examined. "We're not that different," Jae-won said. "We're completely different. We've both built structures to avoid being vulnerable. Mine are intentional and well-designed. Yours are expensive. Can expensive and well-designed overlap? In your case, probably, but expensive doesn't mean functional." On the last day she was in Seoul, they went to the Dongdaemun tteokbokki stall, the 8.5, and she ordered enough for 4 people and ate most of it while re-explaining her rating methodology in detail that Jae-won found both unnecessary and genuinely charming. "I'm going to miss this," she said. "The tteokbokki. Seoul. She gestured, a small wave that encompassed the stall and the street and him. "This. Stay longer. I have a job. Come back. My work is in Accra." "Then..." He stopped himself. "Then what?" she said quietly. "I don't know how this works. I've never wanted to figure it out before. I've always been able to see the end from the beginning and decide I was fine with that. I can't see the end of this. I don't want to. Long distance is genuinely hard. I know. My work always comes first. That's not going to change. I'm not asking it to. And you have a documented history of ending things before they can become real. I want to start something, not end it. I'm in love with you." She went still. "I know that's fast. I know your immediate instinct is to question it, but I wanted you to know before you got on the plane. I've said things to women that weren't true, and I've said nothing when I should have said something, and I've been strategically honest and dishonestly strategic for 10 years. This is none of that. I'm in love with you, and you deserve to know that before you leave." The grandmother at the stall was watching them with unconcealed interest. Somewhere behind them, Min-ho, who had once again failed completely at being inconspicuous at a nearby table, held his breath. Amara didn't say it back, but she reached across the small table and took his hand, and held it, and that was its own kind of answer. Is Jae-won genuinely changed, Or is this just a more sophisticated strategy from a man who's good at reading what people need? What do you think? Tell me in the comments. I want the honest takes. She got on the plane. He stood in the departures hall of Incheon Airport and watched her go through the gate and stood there for a moment after she disappeared, which he had never done before, because he had never before watched someone leave and wished they were staying. Okay? Minho said, standing beside him. No. Good. That means it's real. For 2 months, they made it work, and making it work looked like this. Calls at irregular hours because of the 6-hour time difference, voice memos sent across the night when there wasn't time for a proper call, a shared playlist that grew gradually and revealed things about both of them, a document they added to whenever they found something, an article, a study, a restaurant review, that made them think of the other. Jae-won read 3 books on development economics. Amara sent him field visit reports from community microfinance projects with her own commentary written in the margins in her precise handwriting. He ended things with Soojin properly, with Grace properly, which was a harder conversation, because Grace was perceptive and said, "There's someone else, and she must be extraordinary because I genuinely didn't think you had this in you," which was flattering and devastating simultaneously. With Yuki again, who said, "How many times are we going to do this?" Jae-won, which was fair. With someone else he'd barely even been seeing, a connection so casual he'd never mentioned it to Minho, to whom he now had to explain its existence and termination at the same time. "You ended them all," Minho said, watching this process. "Actually ended them. Properly, not just drifted." "Yes. How does that feel?" "Strange. Good. Also terrifying. That's just commitment. Does it stop feeling terrifying? Ask me in 30 years. There were video calls where they argued genuinely about development policy and corporate ethics and whether Han Group's current CSR framework was doing anything meaningful or just producing content for the annual report. She didn't soften her criticisms because she was talking to the CEO being criticized. He didn't deflect with charm. They pushed each other to positions more precise than either had started, which is the best thing argument can do. "I've never had this," Jae-won said to Minho, "someone who actually argues with me, who's right about things I'm wrong about and says so directly. Ji-won does that to me every day. And you love it." "It's the best part," Minho said simply. Then, 6 weeks in, the problem arrived. Her name was Oh Se-young, 26, accomplished and genuinely lovely, and the daughter of Chairman Oh of Oh Electronics, which was Han Group's most significant and long-standing business partner. For 3 years, without anything ever being formally stated, there had existed a quiet understanding between the Han and Oh families that Se-young and Jae-won were the obvious future of both families' relationship. It lived in the background of every interaction like code running beneath a program, invisible until something triggered it. What triggered it was Jae-won's mother, who had her own network of information and who had heard from sources she would never identify that her son had ended things with multiple women simultaneously and appeared to be genuinely invested in a relationship with a foreign woman who worked in international development and lived in Ghana and was not in any sense that her mother used the word appropriate. Madam Han Yun-soo called on a Wednesday morning. "I've arranged dinner," she said. Her voice was the same temperature it was always, precise and final. "This Saturday evening, the O family. Se-young will be there." "I have plans Saturday." "Your video call with your friend." The word friend was chosen with great care and used as a blade. "She's not." Jae-won. A pause. "I am not your father. I will never pretend the example of our marriage was worth following, but your grandfather built this company, your father expanded it, you are its future, and the future of 30,000 jobs that depend on it.
The O family partnership has been foundational for 15 years. Se-young is educated and capable, and the families have known each other since before you were born.
I'm not going to marry Se-young. I'm not asking you to marry her this Saturday. I'm asking you to have dinner. Mother, one dinner. That is what I am asking for. He should have said no. He knew it while she was still speaking. But he was 33 years old, and there was a part of him that was still, despite everything, afraid of disappointing this woman who had stayed when his father hadn't, who had held everything together while Jae-won was growing up and learning that love was a structural weakness. One dinner, he said. That's all. He didn't tell Amara. Should he have told her? Be honest. Would you want to know? Or is it truly just one dinner and therefore not relevant? I need the comments to be very active on this one. This is exactly the kind of thing that ends relationships or doesn't, and I want to know what you all think. It was one dinner. He was truthful about that part. Se-young was, as anticipated, lovely, warm and funny, and genuinely not interested in the arrangement their parents had built around them, and not responsible for any of it. The evening was pleasant in the way evenings are when the food is good and the people are kind, and there is absolutely no romantic undercurrent whatsoever. But someone tipped off a tabloid photographer. 3 cameras were positioned outside the restaurant when they left. By 7 a.m. the next morning, 4 entertainment news outlets were running photos of Han Jae-won at dinner with the highly anticipated future Han daughter-in-law and speculating about announcement timelines. Amara saw it before he called. The time difference meant it was already late morning in Accra when the story went up. Her message arrived at 5:23 a.m. Seoul time while he was still sleeping. Amara: I see you're having dinners. 3 words and a period, and he was completely awake. Jae-won: I was going to call you this morning. My mother arranged it. I should have told you before it happened, and I didn't, and I'm sorry. Amara: You should have told me. Jae-won: I know. Amara: Why didn't you? He looked at that question for a long time. Jae-won: Because I was afraid of how it would sound, and I was trying to manage the situation before telling you about it, which is what I do when I'm handling something instead of sharing it. 22 minutes of silence. Amara: I need a few days. Jae-won: Okay. Amara: And don't send me Ghanaian spiced coffee expecting it to fix things. Jae-won: I wasn't going to. Amara: You were absolutely going to. He canceled the coffee order. She was right, and he had been going to. The few days became a week, and the week was the hardest 7 days Jae-won had spent in years, not because of external crisis, but because of what it felt like to have said the wrong thing and to have to sit with it without being able to fix it through performance or charm or the careful deployment of romantic gestures. He had to just sit with it. He had no skills for that. He had the conversation with his mother in that week, which was long overdue by approximately 9 years. She lives in Ghana, his mother said, in the voice of someone explaining a simple and obvious thing to someone being willfully obtuse. Accra. She splits her time between Accra and field locations in several countries. And what exactly is the plan? You see each other 4 times a year if your schedules allow? We're working on it. She's not suitable. Please tell me what you mean by suitable. She's not from our world. The world where we attend galas and have business dinners and go home to houses full of people who don't actually know each other? That world? Jae-won, don't. I'm serious. What is suitable? She has a doctorate from the London School of Economics. She runs programs that genuinely change the lives of women in some of the most economically marginalized communities in Africa. She's the most honest and most intelligent person I've spent extended time with in the last 10 years. What specifically disqualifies her? She makes you...
If you say soft, I need you to understand that what she actually makes me is honest, which I have not been, with you, with myself, with anyone for years. He held his mother's eyes. I watched what Dad did. I watched it very closely from ages 8 to 22, and I turned it into a system that let me do a slightly different version of the same thing, and I've been doing it ever since and calling it freedom. She's the first person who saw that clearly and named it with no agenda. That's not a liability. That's the only thing that's mattered. His mother looked at him for a long time. Her face was unreadable in the way his was sometimes, which he understood now in a different way than he had before. One bad dinner does not undo 15 years of partnership with the O family, she said finally. I know. I'll manage it properly. I'll make sure Se-young and her family understand clearly and kindly, but it's not going to happen. She left without another word. The conversation wasn't finished. It never was, after 30 years of not having it, but something had cracked open that couldn't be sealed again. That was something. Then, 2 days after his mother left his office, in a phone call that was going reasonably well, going better than the previous days, something happened that Jae-won would spend considerable time afterward trying to understand in himself. His mother's words came back, the practicalities, the distance, the impossibility, and some part of him that was 14 years old at the bottom of a staircase watching his mother pack a bag decided without consulting the rest of him to protect itself. My mother made some points about the practicality of this, about whether what we're building can actually hold long term. Amara went very quiet on the other end. I'm not saying she's right, I'm saying I've been thinking about it. And what have you been thinking? I think maybe we should consider... He stopped, started again. Maybe it would make sense to take some space. 3 seconds of silence, then, space, Amara said. It's not... Jae-won, she said, and her voice was completely steady, which was worse than anything else it could have been. Look at my face through this screen and say what you're actually saying. He couldn't look at the screen. He looked at his desk. You're scared, she said, not with anger, with the same precise, clear attention she brought to everything, which was the most devastating thing about it. Your mother said something that landed in a wound you've had since you were a teenager, and instead of telling me that, you're using logistics and space to create distance. You're doing the thing you always do. You're building the exit. That's not... Jae-won. I told you the one non-negotiable was honesty. This is not honesty. This is fear wearing the language of practicality. A pause. I need to go. When you figure out what you actually want, not what you're afraid of, what you actually want, you know where I am. The call ended. Jae-won sat in complete silence for 45 minutes. His office held him. Seoul went on outside his windows. He did nothing. Then he called Min-ho. I just told Amara we should take space. Silence. Because your mother said something? Silence. Jae-won. I know. She was the first person you... I know. After everything. Min-ho. I know. Tell me what to do. Get in a car. Come here now. Jae-won needs to talk to you. Jae-won, Min-ho's wife, was a psychotherapist with the specific gift of delivering the most devastating observations in the calmest register, which meant you couldn't defend against them emotionally because she wasn't attacking, she was just describing what she saw with great accuracy. She made Jae-won tea and sat across from him in their living room and said, "Tell me about your father." This isn't... Tell me about your father, Jae-won. An hour later, he had said things out loud he had kept entirely inside for the better part of 20 years, about what it was like to watch love be a weapon, about the specific lessons he'd drawn from his parents' marriage, that intimacy was exposure, that getting close enough to be known meant getting close enough to be damaged, that the rational response was to manage the distance permanently. And Amara, Jae-won said, she got through all of it without even trying. She just treated me like a person and saw what was actually happening and said it clearly every time. Which is why she terrifies you. Yes. And tonight you did the thing your father did, in a different form. He used distance to protect himself from the consequences of his choices. You used space to protect yourself from the consequences of yours. Except Amara wasn't going to leave me. No, she was staying. That's exactly what was terrifying. Jae-won, look at his hands. What do I do?
You know what you do. She might not. She said, when you figure out what you actually want, you know where I am. She told you exactly what to do. Jae-won looked at him calmly. The question is whether you can be terrified and stay anyway. Whether you can be known, the scared parts, the damaged parts, the 14-year-old watching his mother pack, and not run. What if it's too late? You just said she told you to come find her when you figured it out. Has she given you any indication she doesn't mean what she says? No, she always means what she says. Then go find her. Jae-won drove home, sat in his apartment for 4 hours, then opened his laptop and booked a flight to Accra, departing the next morning. He didn't call ahead. He thought about it carefully and decided that warning her gave her the option to tell him not to come, and what he needed to say required being in the same room. Not because grand gestures were the point. She'd told him grand gestures without substance meant nothing. But because some things are only true when they're said face to face, and this was one of them. He landed in Accra on a Thursday afternoon, checked into a hotel, unpacked nothing, and called her. I'm in Accra. A pause that lasted long enough for him to understand she was deciding something. Why? Because I said something dishonest and cowardly, and you called it exactly what it was. And what came before that, and what I understand now about why I did it, deserves to be said in the same room as you, not on a screen, not in a text. Here. Silence. Where are you? He told her the hotel. She arrived an hour later in her work clothes, clearly from the office, and she looked tired in a way that he understood was at least partially his fault, which was a specific kind of uncomfortable. She sat across from him at the outdoor cafe, ceiling fans turning above them, Accra warm and alive and indifferent around them. Say what you came to say, she said. So he did. All of it. What his mother had said and how it landed in a wound that was 30 years old and had nothing to do with Amara and everything to do with watching two people destroy each other in a house that was supposed to be a home. How he'd built a system to prevent ever being that exposed. How she'd gotten through the system without even intending to, just by being exactly who she was, and how that had been the most terrifying thing that had happened to him in his adult life, and how instead of telling her that, he'd done the thing the system was designed to do. He'd created distance. I told you I'd been honest with women. That was true in a narrow sense. I told them it wasn't serious, but I was using that honesty as a legal disclaimer rather than an actual opening. I was saying the right things so I couldn't be held responsible for the consequences. And I did the same thing to you with space. I used reasonable-sounding language to do a thing that wasn't reasonable. He held her eyes. That's the pattern I've been living in since I was 20, and you're the first person who named it while it was happening, and I panicked, and I'm sorry. You flew to Accra, she said. Yes. You could have just called. I could have, but this wasn't a phone call, and I think you would have known that too. She looked at him for a long time. The fans turned. Somewhere nearby, a car horn sounded and someone laughed at something. My grandmother has a saying, in Twi. It roughly translates as, "A man who knows he's lost his way and asks for directions is wiser than one who keeps walking confidently in the wrong direction." Am I the man asking for directions? You're standing at a junction in Accra after flying from Seoul to ask, yes. What are the directions? They're complicated. The corner of her mouth was doing the thing. And you need to actually have the conversation with your mother, the whole one, not just the opener. I already started it. Start it better. Finish it. I will. And the O family situation needs to be handled properly, clearly and kindly to both families. I'll handle it this week. And if you ever do the let's take space thing instead of just telling me what's actually happening, I'm done. Not as a threat, just as information about how I work. Understood. I need you to understand it's also information about how I work, not a punishment. I know the difference. She picked up her coffee, looked at it. I went to a tteokbokki pop-up last week. Korean expat runs it out of a food truck near the Usu area. He blinked at the subject change. In Accra? 6 out of 10. Needs more gochujang, obviously. They always do. When we go back to Seoul, I want to try the stall in Noryangjin Market. I haven't rated it. When we go back. 7 a.m. on a Saturday. The morning crowd gets the freshest batch. I'll be there. They sat together in the Accra afternoon, two people from different cities and different worlds who had no logical reason to work, trying anyway. The ceiling fans turned. Outside, Accra went on, warm and alive. Minho got a message that said, "All good, we're good," and showed it to Jae-won, who said, "Obviously," and went back to her book. The grandmother at the Dongdaemun Pojangmacha continued making tteokbokki, with not quite enough gochujang, coasting on 30 years of institutional reputation, entirely unbothered. And Han Jae-won, who had spent a decade perfecting every exit before he'd fully entered, sat at an outdoor cafe in Accra and felt something he hadn't felt in years, the specific and terrifying relief of being somewhere and meaning it. Han Group opened its Accra Development Partnership Office 14 months later, after a process that Amara had supervised closely to ensure it was substantive rather than symbolic, which took longer and cost more, and produced something actually worth having. Jae-won and his mother continued a conversation that had been waiting 30 years to be had. It was not quick or easy or clean, but it was happening, which was more than it had been. Se-young-oh and her family received a clear, kind, personal conversation rather than a drift into nothing. Amara's microfinance model won an International Development Award. At the ceremony in New York, Jae-won sat in the third row and watched her receive it with an expression that Minho, sitting next to him, described later as clinically unhinged with admiration. "Your eyes are doing the thing," Minho whispered. "I have something in my eye." Both eyes? Again? The lighting in this venue is very affecting. They split time between Accra and Seoul, which was imperfect and required more scheduling and compromise than either of them had previously believed themselves capable of, and had hard months and better months, and arguments that were real arguments resolved with real honesty. There was a tteokbokki stall in Noryangjin Market that became their place. She rated it 8.0, he rated it 8.5. They argued about it every single visit and never reached consensus, which was not a problem, but a recurring occasion, which is what the best things in a shared life become. One evening on the rooftop of the apartment near her Accra office, good light, good view, not fancy, theirs, Amara looked at him. "Do you ever miss it?" "Which part?" The other version, where nothing was serious and nothing was required, and everything was optional. Jae-won thought about it honestly, the way she'd made a habit in him of thinking about things. The freedom of wanting nothing that could be taken away, the lightness of surfaces. "No," he said. "I thought I would, I expected to, but no." "Why not?" "Because that version was just afraid, and afraid is boring." He looked at her. "Being known by you is the only thing that felt real in years. Everything before that was just very well-dressed avoidance." Amara was quiet for a moment. Then, "The Noryangjin tteokbokki is an 8.3. 8.5? I recalibrated. The texture was inconsistent on our last visit. That affects the score." "You cannot retroactively recalibrate scores based on single-visit variance. The system requires ongoing calibration. Your system is biased. You don't even have a system. I have opinions which are just as valid. They are demonstrably not." Below them, Accra hummed and moved, and went on being warm and alive. In Seoul, Mimho got a message that said, "I told you," and didn't ask what she was referring to because he already knew. The Dongdaemun Pojangmacha grandmother was still there, still making the same recipe, still not quite enough gochujang, 32 years and counting. And Han Jae-won, who was the most charming and most unavailable man in Seoul, sat on a rooftop in Accra arguing about tteokbokki scores with the woman who'd fallen asleep during his speech, and understood, finally, completely, with the specific certainty of something you've known for a while but needed to arrive at in your own time, that this was it. This was the thing he'd been building all the exits to avoid.
It was exactly as terrifying as everyone had always said. And it was worth every single moment of that terror and then some. And that is the story of how Seoul's most perfectly constructed player met the one woman who simply couldn't be impressed and fell apart completely and had to put himself back together more honestly than he'd ever been before. A man who had perfected leaving, who had to learn that the bravest thing he would ever do was stay. A woman who had every reason to protect herself, who chose, not blindly, not without conditions, but with clear eyes and good boundaries and a very precise tteokbokki rating system, to believe that people can actually do better. He wasn't stopped by someone who played harder. He was stopped by someone who simply refused to play at all. Now I want your thoughts on everything. Did Jae-won deserve a second chance after the "let's take space" conversation? Or was flying to Accra too little too late? Is there a point of no return in situations like that, and had he crossed it? And the bigger question, do you actually believe people can change the deep patterns, not the surface behavior, but the actual fear underneath it? Can a person who built their whole identity around emotional unavailability genuinely become someone who stays? And if you're completely honest with yourself right now, are you more like Jae-won, building exits before you fully entered? Or more like Amara, walls up, but reasons are solid? Because most of us are one or the other. And if this story hit differently than you expected, that might be worth sitting with. Tell me everything in the comments. I read all of them, and I mean that. This community has genuinely extraordinary conversations, and you are the reason for that. If this story moved you, made you think about someone, made you want to call someone you've been avoiding, or made you look at your own patterns differently, please share it. Send it to someone who needs it. Send it anonymously to someone who is a Jae-won. You'll know who. Subscribe right now if you haven't already, because we put out stories like this every single week, and every one is designed to make you feel something real. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one. And like the video if you stayed until the very end. It tells us that stories like this are what you want more of, and we will absolutely deliver.
Remember this: the most guarded people fall the hardest. The most independent people need the most genuine love. And sometimes the person who changes your entire life walks into a crowded room and falls asleep during your speech. Stay open, stay honest, stay subscribed. See you in the next story. Heart.